In my 35 years on the bench in Providence, Rhode Island, I have seen fear, pride, sorrow, excuses, and grace walk through my courtroom doors in every possible form. But the morning that little 7-year-old girl stood beside the defendant's table, clutching a paper envelope to her chest, I felt something unusual before a word was spoken. If this touches your heart, leave a comment, because what that child was hiding would stop my courtroom cold. I looked down at the citation expecting a simple municipal matter, and instead I found myself staring into a story that would follow me home and stay with me long after the gavel came down. People sometimes think these cases are only about parking tickets, missed hearings, traffic violations, and fines. Of course, the law matters. I would never sit on that bench if I did not believe that rules matter. But let me tell you something, my friends. After 35 years in municipal court, I have learned that every file has two stories. One is written in black ink on paper. The other is written in the face of the person standing in front of me. If you ignore the second story, you may enforce the law, but you may fail justice. That morning had started the way many mornings do in my courtroom. The clerk was calling names. Inspector Quinn was standing nearby, with that steady presence of his. The prosecutor had a neat stack of citations, and people in the gallery were waiting their turn with the usual mixture of anxiety and impatience. Some came in ready with explanations. Some came in ready with excuses. Some came in already defeated. Then the clerk called the next case, and I looked up. A woman stepped forward first, thin, exhausted, moving with the cautious energy of someone trying not to fall apart in public. Beside her stood a little girl in a yellow sweater that had been washed so many times the color had softened into something almost pale. Her hair was combed carefully, though one side had already slipped loose. In her arms she held a large white envelope folded at the corners and thick with whatever was inside. She did not look at me right away. She was staring at the floor, then at the woman, then back at the envelope, as if it contained something precious enough to protect from the whole world. I looked at the citation. Parking violation, meter expired, late penalty added because the hearing had been missed. The total was not enormous by legal standards, but I have spent enough years on that bench to know that what looks small in a file can feel enormous in a struggling household. I said, "Good morning. Who am I speaking with?" The woman answered quietly, "My name is Denise Alvarez, Your Honor." "And who's this?" I asked, glancing toward the little girl. The child raised her eyes for just a second. Big eyes, tired eyes, not frightened exactly, watchful. Children who have seen too much become watchful. "This is my niece, Sophia," Denise said. "Hello, Sophia," I said. She gave me the tiniest nod and pulled the envelope tighter against her sweater. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, hit that like button if you believe kindness still matters in a courtroom, because I could tell right away this was not going to be an ordinary hearing. I looked back to Denise and said, "All right, let me ask you something. You've got a parking ticket here, and then you missed the hearing, which added a late fee. What happened?" She took a breath and said, "I'm sorry, Judge. I was going to come. I really was. Things got complicated." Now I hear that phrase a lot. Things got complicated. Sometimes it means disorganization. Sometimes it means avoidance. Sometimes it means life dropped a piano on somebody's shoulders. I did not rush to decide which this was. I simply said, "Complicated how?" She glanced down at Sophia, then back at me. "I'm raising her now. My sister passed away 6 months ago. Sophia's mother." The room changed, right there. You can feel it from the bench when that happens. Papers stop moving. People who had been thinking only of their own cases begin listening with their hearts. Even the attorneys shift. The courtroom becomes less a machine and more a gathering of human beings. I looked at the child again, and suddenly the watchfulness in her face made sense. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you, Your Honor," Denise replied. I have always paid attention to children in my courtroom. Their presence tells me things the paperwork never does. Some fidget because they are bored, some cling because they are scared, some stare at the adults trying to gauge whether the ground under their lives is about to shift again. Sophia stood very still, too still. That in a child usually tells its own story. I asked, "You're 7?" She nodded. "What grade are you in?" "Second," she whispered. Her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it, but the way she answered politely, almost formally, told me someone had taught her manners in the middle of hardship. I thought of my own family. My parents were children of immigrants. We didn't have wealth growing up, but we had values, respect, hard work, dignity, compassion. Those things shape the way you see people for the rest of your life. I turned back to Denise. "Tell me about the ticket." She said it was issued outside a pharmacy on a rainy afternoon. The meter had expired. She had run inside with Sophia to pick up medication. When she came back out, there was the citation on the windshield. She admitted the meter was overdue. She did not argue with the basic fact. That matters to me. Honesty matters. But then she missed the hearing because, as she put it, everything fell apart that week. "What do you mean, everything?" I asked. She swallowed. "The state was reviewing custody papers. I had appointments, school meetings, a social worker. My hours got cut at work. And Sophia had nightmares. She didn't want to sleep alone." At that, the little girl's hand reached for Denise's sleeve without even looking up. Instinct, need, familiarity. That told me the bond was real, not convenient. Subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because what the little girl did next made me look at that case in a completely different way. As Denise was speaking, Sophia slowly lifted the white envelope and placed it on the ledge in front of the defendant's table, not handed to her aunt, not to the clerk. She set it there herself with a seriousness that caught my attention immediately. I said, "What's that, sweetheart?" She looked at Denise first, as though asking permission with her eyes. Denise seemed surprised, truly surprised. That was interesting. Then Sophia answered, "It's for you." Now, over the years, people have brought many things into my courtroom: documents, photographs, medical records, pay stubs, registration forms, sometimes letters, occasionally a family picture. But the way this little girl offered that envelope, holding it with both hands like a church offering, told me it was more than paperwork. I said gently, "For me?" She nodded. "It's important." I looked at Denise. "Do you know what's in it?" Denise shook her head. "No, Your Honor, I honestly don't." That got my full attention. I motioned for the clerk to bring the envelope to me. It was sealed, though not neatly. The flap had been moistened and pressed shut with the determination only a child or a desperate adult can manage. On the front, in uneven block letters, were 3 words: "For the judge." I did not open it right away. I looked at Sophia first. "May I?" She nodded again, this time gripping the edge of the table. When I opened the envelope, I found a stack of folded papers, a few crayon drawings, several coins taped to an index card, and a smaller note tucked inside a lined notebook page. The coins made a faint clinking sound against the bench, and that sound alone did something to my heart. Pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, maybe $7 or $8 total, carefully secured with clear tape in neat little rows. Children arrange money differently from adults. There is reverence in it, effort, hope. I unfolded the top note. It said in a child's handwriting, "Dear Judge, this is my money. I saved it so my Auntie Denise does not go to jail because she takes care of me now and I don't have anybody else." My throat tightened instantly. I paused, not theatrically. I just needed a second. I have been doing this for 35 years, and even now there are moments that reach through the robe and remind me that before I'm a judge, I am a human being. I looked up at Sophia. She was staring at me like her entire future depended on the expression on my face. I said softly, "Who told you your aunt was going to jail?" She answered, "Nobody, but people go to court when they're in trouble." "What am I going to do with you?" I thought it immediately, but with tenderness, not exasperation, because there it was, the secret, the burden she had been carrying, not some childish prank, not hidden candy, a child's private fear translated into coins and a letter. If this touches your heart, leave a comment, because that was only the beginning of what I was about to learn, and I still had to do the careful work of understanding what was true, what was fear, and what justice required. I said, "Sophia, your aunt is not going to jail over this ticket." The relief that crossed her face happened so quickly and so completely that it was almost painful to watch. Her shoulders dropped, her grip loosened. She took in a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. Then she asked the question that broke half the room before I even answered it. "Are you sure?" I leaned forward. "I am sure." She nodded, but tears gathered in her eyes anyway. Sometimes children do not know what to do when fear leaves their body. It comes out as tears because there is finally room. Denise covered her mouth and looked at the child as if she had been struck by the realization of what Sophia had been silently carrying. "Sophie," she whispered, "why didn't you tell me you thought that?" Sophia shrugged the way children do when they are trying to make something huge sound small. "You already had enough sad." That line moved through the courtroom like a wave. I looked over at Inspector Quinn. He gave me a look that said it all. The prosecutor shifted in his chair. In the gallery, I could see one woman already reaching for a tissue. These are the moments people later say went viral or touched millions on Caught on Providence. But in real time, that is not what you are thinking about. In real time, you are just trying to keep the room steady enough to honor the truth. I said to Denise, "Did you know she was saving money?" Denise shook her head, tears starting now. "No, Judge, I had no idea." I looked back down at the envelope. Beneath the note were 3 drawings. One showed a little house under a huge yellow sun with 2 stick figures holding hands. One figure was labeled me, the other was labeled Auntie D. Another showed a woman with long dark hair and a halo over her head. Underneath it, the child had written Mommy. The third showed my bench, though in Sophia's version, it looked much taller and more like a castle than a courtroom. Above it, she had written, "Please help us." That is the kind of thing that can make a courtroom feel suddenly sacred. Now, I still had to be a judge. Emotion cannot replace process. I said, "All right, let's slow this down. Denise, tell me exactly what happened with the ticket. Then I want to understand what's going on at home." She nodded, wiping her eyes. She explained that she had parked at a meter outside a pharmacy because Sophia had been prescribed medication for anxiety-related sleep disturbances after her mother's death. The child had been waking up screaming. Denise had only a short window before the pharmacy closed. She put money in the meter, but inside there was a delay with insurance. By the time she returned, the meter had expired and the ticket was issued. Then, because she was handling temporary guardianship hearings and trying to keep her job, she missed the first court date. The late fee got added. I asked, "Do you have any documentation?" She had it. That too mattered. A pharmacy receipt with the date and time, a court notice from family court, a letter from a school counselor, even a shift schedule from work. Not everybody comes prepared like that. When someone does, it tells me they respect the process, even if life has made them late to it. Before I tell you what I discovered in those papers, hit that like button if you believe everyone has a story behind the mistake, because the file in front of me was about to turn from sad to devastating. I checked the pharmacy receipt first. The timing matched the ticket exactly. Then I looked at the school counselor's note. It mentioned grief-related anxiety, separation fear, and episodes of panic when Sophia believed caregivers might disappear. That aligned perfectly with what I had just seen. The child had not been being dramatic. She had been living in a state of fear. Then I looked at the family court document. Temporary guardianship had been granted to Denise pending a full hearing. There was a handwritten notation on the top from a clerk's office, and I asked Denise about it. She said, "There's a question about the father." "Where is he?" I asked. "I don't know," she said quietly. "He left when Sophia was a baby." That explained the word orphan in the blunt, painful way life sometimes creates these labels. Mother gone, father gone, not dead perhaps, but absent enough that for a 7-year-old child, the difference may not feel important. I looked at Sophia again, and I thought of all the ways children interpret abandonment. They assume it says something about them. It never does, But try telling that to a grieving 7-year-old at 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, "And your sister, how did she pass?" Denise lowered her eyes. "Cancer, fast, too fast." There are some words people say in court that contain entire funerals. Too fast was one of them. I did not press for details right away. Sometimes you can see when someone is answering from the edge of an emotional cliff. Instead, I asked, "And you are working?" "Yes, Your Honor." "At a diner, part-time now." "Do you have children of your own?" "No, sir." "So all of this changed your life in an instant?" "Yes." She said that last word with no self-pity, just fact. I admire that, but I also worry about it. People who do not complain are often the ones closest to collapse. Then the prosecutor did something decent. He said, "Your Honor, if the documentation supports the circumstances, the city would have no objection to some relief." I appreciated that. Good prosecutors understand that public order and humanity are not enemies. They work together when people act with sense. I nodded and said, "Let me continue." I went back to Sophia's envelope. Tucked inside the smaller note was another page, and this one was folded several times like something private. I hesitated before opening it. "Sophia, did you want me to read all of this?" She nodded, but then she said, "That one is the secret." Now we were getting somewhere. I looked at Denise. She seemed genuinely baffled. "I haven't seen it," she said. I unfolded the paper. Inside was a letter written in careful second-grade handwriting. It was addressed not to me, but to her mother. "Dear Mommy, Auntie Denise cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. I hear her in the kitchen. She says she is trying. I saved my money from the tooth fairy and from my birthday. If the judge is nice, maybe I can help pay so she doesn't send me away because I cost too much. Please tell God to make me easier." I had to stop reading. "You want to talk about a secret that breaks your heart?" There it was. Not hidden treasure, not a child's harmless surprise. A little girl believing she needed to become less needy, less expensive, less difficult in order to deserve being kept. That is the kind of pain that does not belong in a child's chest. The room went dead silent. I looked up slowly. Denise was already crying openly now, one hand pressed against her forehead. "No," she whispered. "No, Sophia. Oh, baby, no." Sophia's face crumpled because children often panic when adults cry, especially adults they depend on. I immediately shifted my tone. Hey, it's all right," I said gently. "Nobody is sending you anywhere. Do you hear me? Nobody." She looked at me, tears spilling now. "Really? Really?" Then I turned to Denise and said, "Come stand closer to her." She moved immediately, putting a hand on the girl's shoulder. Sophia leaned into her aunt without even thinking. That told me more than any affidavit. Subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because what happened next showed me exactly how deep this child's fear went. And it forced me to decide not only what to do with the fine, but what kind of moment this court needed to become. I said, "Sophia, let me ask you something. Why did you think your aunt might send you away?" She answered in that quiet, matter-of-fact voice children sometimes use when describing unbearable things. "Because she says bills, and because I had to get new shoes, and because she says she's sorry to Mommy when she's alone." Denise broke down at that, not loudly, not theatrically. The kind of breaking that happens when someone realizes a child has been listening through walls, translating adult stress into personal guilt. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said to Denise, "Have you told her directly that she is staying with you?" She nodded weakly. "Yes, many times." But children in grief often trust tone more than words. They hear the worry in the house, and they conclude the promise is fragile. I knew that. I had seen it before. I said, "May I ask what you say in the kitchen when you think she is sleeping?" Denise gave a small, embarrassed laugh through tears. "That I don't know what I'm doing, that my sister picked the wrong person, that I'm trying not to fail." That was the moment I understood this case fully. It was not just about a parking ticket. It was about two grieving people standing in the middle of a life they had not chosen, each afraid the other would be better off without them, and each quietly sacrificing so the other might feel safe. Let me tell you something, my friends. This is why I never rush a case when my instincts tell me there is more. I have been doing this for 35 years, and one of the biggest mistakes people in authority make is deciding they know the whole truth too early. The paperwork had one story, the envelope had another, and now a third story was emerging. The hidden conversation of grief happening in that apartment every night. I asked Denise, "Are you struggling financially?" She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, except there was no humor in it. "Yes, Your Honor, very much." "How much do you make?" she told me. It was not enough. Not for rent, utilities, food, school needs, transportation, and legal paperwork. I asked whether she had received assistance. Some, but inconsistent. Forms pending, a delay in survivor benefits, a stack of phone calls not returned. Again, the familiar maze. Then I asked, "Did your sister leave anything behind? Insurance? Savings?" She shook her head. "Debt." I looked down at the citation again. Meter violation, late fee, administrative cost. The law gives me certain options in a case like this. Dismissal is possible if the circumstances warrant it, but I never do that carelessly. I wanted to understand not just hardship, but character. So I asked, "Denise, why didn't you ask for a continuance when you missed the first hearing?" She said, "I was embarrassed." There's that word again, ashamed, embarrassed. I hear it constantly. Good people mistake struggle for personal failure, and shame pushes them away from the very systems that might help them. "Embarrassed about what?" I asked. She looked at me and said that I'm 32 years old, sleeping 4 hours a night, forgetting things, crying in my kitchen, and can't even manage a parking ticket. Now, that was honesty. I said, "No, you are not embarrassed because of a parking ticket. You are overwhelmed because your sister died, and you became a mother overnight. Those are not the same thing." She stared at me as though nobody had said it that plainly before. Hit that like button if you believe the truth should be spoken kindly, because in that moment I knew this was one of those cases where the legal outcome mattered, but the words spoken from the bench might matter even more. I turned back to Sophia and asked, "Who gave you the idea to save all these coins?" She answered, "I just did it." "Did anybody help you write the note?" "No." "And the letter to your mommy?" "No." That meant every painful line in that letter had come directly from the mind of a grieving child. No adult shaping it, no performance, just fear. Then I saw one more item in the envelope, a laminated bookmark with a photograph tucked inside it. I pulled it out carefully. It was a photo of Sophia with her mother, taken in what looked like a hospital room. Her mother was wearing a scarf on her head and smiling weakly. Sophia was sitting beside her with a coloring book in her lap. On the back, in adult handwriting, were the words, "For my Sophia, be brave. Auntie Denise will always love you." I showed it to Denise. Her hand flew to her mouth. "I didn't know she had that," Sophia answered. "Mommy put it in my book." Now we were deep into the human center of the case. The mother had left the child a message naming the aunt specifically. That mattered to me because it confirmed something vital. Denise had not drifted into this role by accident. Her sister had trusted her, chosen her in a sense. There is responsibility in that, but there is also blessing. I said to Sophia, "Do you know what your mommy wrote here?" She nodded. "What do you think it means?" She looked at Denise, then back at me. "That I get to stay." I turned to Denise. "Have you seen this?" "No, Your Honor." "Then I'm glad we all have now. I have always believed that a courtroom can become more than a place of sanction. Sometimes it becomes a place where truth finally gets said out loud. That is what was happening. This little envelope had done what grief and exhaustion had prevented in that apartment. It had forced the hidden fears into the open. Before I tell you what I decided about the ticket, share this if you know someone who needs hope, because there was still one more twist coming, and it changed me from moved to shaken. I said, "Sophia, is there anything else you wanted me to know?" She hesitated. Then she nodded. I waited. She reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled out a tiny folded square of paper worn from being opened and closed many times. This one I didn't put in the envelope because I was scared. I said, "Would you like me to read it?" Another nod. I opened it. Inside, in the same careful child's writing, were the words, "If Auntie Denise says I can't stay forever, can you please adopt me because you are nice and you listen?" That was the moment I felt my eyes burn. I am not ashamed to tell you that. I have sat in judgment for decades. I have seen suffering in all forms. I know how to keep control of a courtroom, but there are moments when the innocence of a child reaches beyond training, beyond office, beyond everything. This was one of those moments. She had created a backup plan in her mind. If the aunt could not keep her, maybe the judge could. I set the paper down very carefully. The entire courtroom was frozen. I saw people in the gallery wiping their eyes. Even the prosecutor looked down at his file as if to give everyone a second to gather themselves. Inspector Quinn, who has seen every kind of scene, looked toward the ceiling for a moment. He understood. We all did. I said softly, "Sophia, I already have a family, but let me tell you something important. You do too." She blinked at me through tears. Then I turned to Denise and said, "Would you like to respond to what she has been carrying?" Denise knelt right there in the well of the courtroom. Despite the formality of the room, despite the people watching, despite the fact that she was shaking, she put both hands on Sophia's shoulders and said, "Listen to me. You are not expensive. You are not too much. You are not going anywhere. I was crying because I love you and I miss your mommy, and I'm scared of messing this up, but I'm not sending you away, ever." The child collapsed into her arms. The sound of a child crying from relief is different from the sound of a child crying from fear. It has air in it. Release. It rises and falls like a storm passing. I had to pause again because if I had spoken too soon, my own voice would have gone. Subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because what I said next came from the deepest part of what I believe a judge is supposed to do. I let the moment breathe. Then I said, "Denise, stand up for a second. Sophia, you too." They did, wiping tears. I said, "I want both of you to hear me clearly. This court is not just here to punish mistakes. It is here to see people truthfully. What I see in front of me is not neglect, and it is not irresponsibility. I see grief. I see love. I see two people trying very hard not to lose each other." Then I looked at Sophia and said, "And I want you to hear this from the judge. You are not a burden. You are a blessing.